The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast is presented by Childcare Search. Does your search for childcare have you stressed out? There's a lot to consider, like quality, price, location, schedule, and more. At Childcare Search, a service of Childcare Resources, Inc., our knowledgeable navigators can help you find licensed care that fits your family's needs. Visit www.findchildcarenc.org or call 1-888-600-1685 for free personalized guidance. Hey, it's Tony Mecia with the Charlotte Ledger, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger at thecharlotteledger.com. Today, I'm talking with Steve Harrison. He's a political reporter for WFAE, and this is a recording of our conversation from February 23rd, 2026 at the Sharon at SouthPark Retirement Community. Steve and I work together on the Ledger's Charlotte in Motion newsletter, which is a partnership between the Ledger and WFAE, which is Charlotte's NPR station. That comes out every other Thursday, and it looks into growth and transit and transportation and a whole bunch of issues in the Charlotte area. But in this conversation, Steve and I talk about something that's in the news, something that's been in the news a lot lately. This issue of the I-77 toll lanes and what the effect of expanding I-77 would have on some neighborhoods near Uptown. And if you've been wondering, hey, what's going on with that? I don't really understand that issue. Where is it coming from? Why is it happening now? Well, I'm hoping that today's conversation provides you with some enlightenment. We also talk about the effect of the recent transit referendum, what it means for traffic, those sorts of things, as well as several other current topics. I hope you enjoy the conversation with Steve Harrison of WFAE. And now let's get to the conversation. All right, well, let's talk about a few things in the news that you've been covering. You know, the news from the last few weeks, one of the really interesting ones is this idea of expanding Interstate 77 between Uptown and the South Carolina line. And anybody who's ever driven that knows that that stretch can be very congested. There's a lot of traffic through there. It can be very slow going. And this is even in the middle of the day, to say nothing of if you happen to be driving from Uptown and you're going to Fort Mill or wherever. The traffic is pretty bad. And there have been plans on the books for many years to widen I-77. Now, it seems like as they're starting to get a little bit closer to that, there's some opposition that has come out to that. The way that they had settled on widening it was with toll lanes, which a lot of people don't like, but that the state says is necessary. That's really the only way you could pay for it because it would be very expensive. But what's going on with those I-77 toll lanes and some of the opposition?
Yeah, I'll start and say, I mean, it's just a horrible highway. You know, I'll sometimes leave Uptown at 7 p.m. and I live in South Charlotte, so I automatically get on 77 without thinking. You can't do it. You make that turn and you merge, it's just like total red lights, even at 7 o'clock. I mean, there's only a few hours a day when you can just drive it. So it's a huge problem. There's a need. And the state's position is that it's such a complicated project because if you think about it, it's a really narrow footprint. There's buildings everywhere. The bridges every bridge has to be torn down. It's really expensive. And so they're saying we have to have toll lanes to help pay for this from the toll revenue. And so initially the controversy over this highway was over the idea of toll lanes because remember the state built toll lanes in North Mecklenburg and it was a huge, huge fight. I would say it's still very controversial. If you want to drive the entire length from Uptown Charlotte to Mooresville at rush hour, it'll probably cost $40. Incredibly expensive, yes. At least 25, sometimes 30. So when we were talking about widening 77 from Uptown to South Carolina, that was the focus. It was always like the controversy over the idea of tolling and how much people were going to pay. And recently, however, the state put out the maps of what the project is going to look like. And to widen it through Uptown, the road is going to get wider. I mean, not a big surprise. But a lot of the neighborhoods around Uptown saw the maps for the first time and were really outraged because when the highway was originally built 50 or 60 years ago, it tore right through their neighborhoods, separated them from uptown. And okay, that was then. And now they say you're going to add even more. You're going to demolish more homes. You're going to kind of further divide us from uptown. And they're saying, why are we doing this again? And so that has become the big fight. And it's just been really interesting to watch it play out.
Yeah. Have you seen something like this play out before? You've been covering Charlotte, the Charlotte region for 20 years. Has there been anything like this in your mind?
I haven't seen anything like this because so many of the other road projects were, remember we built the outer belt, 485 around the city. Well, that basically went through the country. The only complaint there was, why is this taking so long? It took probably, 30 years from start to finish. We had that original controversy, and this happened in many American cities in the 20th century when all the interstates were built. And many of them went through Black communities, not all. I mean, there were other communities impacted, but a lot of African-American communities felt the brunt, and it was kind of widely considered that was a mistake. We shouldn't do that again. But now we find ourselves in 2026 with this road that is a real problem. It is a disaster. No one likes it. And we're back kind of in the same place. And so this has been a really controversial issue, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how it plays out over the next probably 6 months.
So what do you think is going to happen? I mean, it strikes me that typically in these kind of situations, they throw out a plan, and then they have some conversations with the community, they modify the plan, and sort of nobody really likes the compromise, but that's sort of what goes forward. Is that what's going to happen here, or what do you see happening here?
So one of the controversies, the local leaders in Charlotte had to give their blessing to this project for it to move forward, to allow the state to do it. And that came in October 2024. And the Charlotte City Council was kind of told, like, hey, this is just one step. It's a small thing. We can always back out. We can always say no. And then there was some fine print in what they passed that said, once the state issued an RFQ, which is request for qualifications, it's them asking for resumes. They went out to contractors and said, hey, what's your experience? Send us your resume. They did that in August 2025. And in the state, and this has made a lot of people very angry, the state then put out the detailed maps 2 months later. And a lot of people on the west side of Charlotte are saying, hey, you had this information for a long time. Why didn't you tell us what this was going to do to our communities? So now there's this kind of bureaucratic fight over, can we stop the project? Can we pause the project? Can we change the project? And there's people who are wanting to do that. And then on the other side, there's the bureaucracy that says, no, too late. You took a vote. We asked for resumes. We can't turn around. So it's interesting to watch this legal, kind of trench warfare fight to try and get this road across the finish line.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch. Do we know about what exactly under the current plans, what would happen to those neighborhoods? How many houses we're talking about? I mean, how big of a deal this is?
So the state put out 2 plans originally, and this is for the part around uptown Charlotte. And the first plan would have the new lanes just all at grade level, at the same level as the highway. So that had the widest footprint. And I don't know the number of homes, but there would be a significant number that would have to be bought and bulldozed. And then the state had the other plan was, well, we can build the toll lanes on top of the highway. And so, okay, to the state's credit, that's a much narrower path. And it impacts fewer homes, which is a good thing. But a lot of the residents are still saying, look, we don't want this either. And I sympathize because, if I'm here, if I live here and I look out a quarter of a mile away, I wouldn't want a big bridge going by my house with cars going by. So it's a tough issue. I mean, because it's hard to add new places for cars to go without taking something away.
It's also, I think it's kind of interesting just to watch the politics of it, because a long time ago, maybe, 10, 20 years ago, there was this big movement to try to take politics out of road building, that you had complaints by people in Charlotte that said, well, listen, the state is building all these roads in rural areas. You ever been out to Asheboro by the zoo? They have this big road out there, and there's nobody lives out there.
Eastern North Carolina, too. You get out there, and there's massive roads, and there's no one around.
And so, they put together a very complicated process for how these things are supposed to work now. It's consultation with local, elected leaders, and it's things that are identified as priorities. But now, now that the politics of it seems to be changing a little bit, it's interesting to watch and to see, well, do our elected officials really have any input in this now?
Yeah. So as Tony said, Governor McCrory, when he was in office from 2012 to 2016, did this new data-driven way to build roads. And as Tony said, in theory, take the politics out of it. Now this highway project has become incredibly political. And you've got some members on the Charlotte City Council who were saying clearly, like, no, we need to vote to stop this or pause it. You have some members who are realizing this is a real problem and are kind of saying they want to pause it and stop it, but perhaps are hoping that bureaucratic inertia takes care of the process. Like, they want to be able to say, hey, we tried, we're doing our best, and then at the end of the day, it still happens, if that makes sense.
Who are the people on the council who are taking those different positions?
Well, so on the council, there are some kind of council members who are adamantly wanting to stop the road. Joy Mayo represents District 3, which covers a lot of that community, including Wilmore. So Joy is kind of very much in the no camp. Kimberly Owens was just elected to Charlotte City Council for this district. District 6 doesn't really, is not personally impacted, but she's very, very concerned, and she's kind of aligned herself with kind of the no group. There's a new council member in East Charlotte who's been very adamant against it. And then there's some kind of older council, more established members. Malcolm Graham, for instance, he has a lot of district residents in his district too, and he's kind of taken the position of, I don't like these designs, I'm very concerned, but we need to do something. And his position kind of leads to the inevitable of well, this is going to happen, but he's protesting it, if that makes sense. Is that a fair statement, Tony?
Yeah, I just think in general, it's a touchy issue for a lot of these politicians. And so I'm not saying they want to have it both ways, but they want to, I think, try to respect the process while, giving voice to residents who are concerned about it, while also trying to balance that with, is this something that's needed to continue to build our infrastructure as a growing city? So, it's been really fascinating to watch. We'll be right back to the conversation. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast is presented by Child Care Search, helping families navigate childcare with confidence. Well, another thing that you've covered, Steve, a lot was this transit referendum that passed in November, where we as a community, as Mecklenburg County, voted to increase the sales tax by 1 percentage point in order to fund construction of roads, road-related projects, sidewalks, rail, buses. What kind of an effect do you think that's going to have, and how soon will we see that?
That's a good question. There's 3 pieces to it. There's a road piece, there is a bus piece, and then there's this building more trains piece. And the train part, it takes forever. It's really, it just takes a long time. The biggest priority is to build a commuter train from Uptown to Lake Norman. The Red Line, have y'all heard of that? So I think the Red Line is going to be built because of this tax. One of the questions will be, are there enough people projected to ride on it to get money from the federal government to help to build it? But even if that doesn't happen, there's enough money to do it. So I think the Red Line will open in 10 years. And they have a lot of other ambitious plans to build a light rail from the airport through Uptown, kind of along Independence Boulevard. That one's going to be a tougher one. It costs so much money. And anything, any project, road, transit, just a home renovation, anything. I mean, it always costs more than you planned. And that happened, we were supposed to have more trains than we do today, but they just ran out of money. And so I think that's going to be something that will be talked about and will be in 5 or 10 years.
And how much of an effect do you think this plan will have on traffic? As people drive around, are they going to see very many changes because of this? Is traffic, and it seemed like one of the selling points, give them the green light to more green lights or something. I mean, are we going to see that?
I would say no. I don't think you'll be able to measure, I don't think traffic will look any different. I think one of the strengths of the plan, however, is that, for instance, this train, to Lake Norman, if one person, leaves their car and takes the train, and it gives them, they have the choice to do that, then someone else is going to get in their car and take their spot on the highway. They will fill up that empty, because we always hear how many people are moving here a day. I think the true selling point of the plan isn't so much reducing congestion. It is, I think, just giving people a choice and saying, we want to build sidewalks all over the city so people can say, you know what? I can just walk. I don't have to get in my car. I can walk up to the McDonald's here on Fairview. Maybe I can walk to SouthPark. And here, there are already sidewalks in this area, but there's a lot of parts of the city where that doesn't exist. And so I think the biggest kind of benefit of the plan is choice in terms of, but I don't think it's going to be this revolutionary, we wasted X number of hours in congestion at this point, and then we passed a plan and it went down. I don't see any way that happens.
I know one of the other parts of that plan is what they're calling micro-mobility, which is creating areas within the city in which you can take essentially an Uber-like service. And I know residents here at the Sharon South Park have access to the South Park Skipper. So we could see more things like that around town. How does that play out? Is that something that would be helpful?
Yeah, I think so. What happened in transit nationwide, not just in Charlotte, is that around 2014, there was kind of a peak among people who use transit, buses, trains, whatever. And then after that, there's this slow decline each year. And then we get to COVID and it goes much worse. But that COVID's kind of a different thing. But even before COVID, fewer people were riding the bus, fewer people riding the train. And what happened in 2014 was really the rise of Uber and Lyft. They really became ubiquitous in the technology and people's cell phones. And it may not be a great financial decision to pay $12 to ride an Uber from point A to point B, but people decide it's worth it. They would rather pay the $12 instead of walking to the bus, taking the bus, walking from there to the bus stop. So that's been a big deal. It's really hurt transit, not just in Charlotte, but everywhere. So a lot of cities, including Charlotte, are doing essentially their own Uber. And they are going into kind of more remote parts of the county. They have plans to, and have a little fleet of basically sedans, maybe little sedans or SUVs, and you call or use the app, and for $2.20, they'll take you anywhere within the zone. They won't take you uptown or anything, but they'll, if you have to go to a doctor's appointment, they'll take you there. If you have to go to the grocery store, they'll do that. I think for the transit system, CATS, it's an effort. They are trying to kind of innovate and meet the customer where they are, because they found that people just in 2025, 2026, there's just not enough people who are willing to take the bus. And how long it takes to walk to the bus, like I said, walk to the bus stop, et cetera. And so they're trying to meet that demand.
Is that micromobility, those Uber-like services that they're talking about providing, is part of that to solve what they call the last mile problem, which is around here in South Park, there's not going to be a rail line. There's no rail line on the books. But if you wanted to take the rail line, is there a way to get there without driving your car? Is the micromobility designed to try to help make it easier to ride those rail and bus lines?
In theory, that's what they like to do. The idea is that you can call the little Uber taxi and it will could take you to the train station, then you take the train uptown. You can certainly do that. I don't think it's going to be so much like taking people to a different bus or a train. I think it's just like, please take me from my house to my doctor's office or the mall or the grocery store. I think that's where it's going to have the most impact. And I think we've seen that in SouthPark.
Is Charlotte considering driverless cars?
I guess they're big companies. So Waymo is one. Who else is doing it? I mean, Google has one. They have some technology. And I have not ridden in one, but when you go to Phoenix and you can just ride in the back and it will, I mean, have you ever taken one?
I've never taken one. I was in Los Angeles last year and they were all over the road.
But you've seen them. I mean,
it was really
I don't know if
fun.
y'all ever, the videos are amazing. I mean, you're sitting in the back seat and this thing is just, so I think eventually that's coming to Charlotte. You know, they are just rolling, these companies are rolling them out in different test markets, but we're a wealthy city, we're a growing city. I would expect some kind of pilot program to be here within 5 years.
Yeah, and I mean, the technology is getting a lot better. You know, you look at some of these Teslas or some of these other cars that have you start weaving out of your lane and it starts beeping at you, or, it can kind of auto drive. I mean, some of the technology there is pretty amazing.
One thing I read that was, and I can't remember which company it was, but the company was trying to program the car to be a little more human-like, because I think what they found was it would get to a four-way stop and it would sit and wait.
It would fully stop, come to full stop, unlike humans.
And they're trying to get it to be a little more aggressive and just drive normally. And I don't know. I want to see that. I think it'd be neat for it to come to Charlotte. And in theory, that has the potential to revolutionize transportation, because Uber, you're paying for a driver to take you. And if you have a car that can make 50 trips a day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little old-fashioned and it makes me a little bit nervous. But then again, a bunch of humans driving and looking at their phones while driving makes me nervous too. Just moving on, we'll do a couple more questions and then we'll open up to y'all's questions a little bit more. So Steve, you've been covering local government in this city for a while. How has it changed over the years? How were things when you first got here? I think you said 2006, and now it's 2026. How has local government changed and sort of your dealings with public officials changed?
The biggest thing is just simply who is in charge. And so when I came here in 2006, Pat McCrory was mayor. He served 7 terms, so he was going to serve until 2009. So he was a Republican. The rest of the city council kind of flipped between a Republican and a Democratic control. It's 11 members, so sometimes it'd be 6 Republicans, 5 Democrats, et cetera. And so that was then. And now we had a municipal election last year in 2025. Now there's only 1 Republican left on the city council. Republicans make an attempt to run citywide in Charlotte, and it is a lost cause. You just can't do it. I'll back up and say most cities in North Carolina have their city and town elections as nonpartisan. When you go into the voting booth, it just says their name. And a lot of people, of course, know, like, oh, he's a Democrat, he's a Republican, but a fair number don't. Charlotte is unique, and we have that identifier, Republican, Democrat. And this city has become increasingly Democratic over the past 20 years. You really saw it in 2008 under Barack Obama. A lot of people started voting Democratic, and then under President Trump, it accelerated even more. So you can be a great candidate, you could be a great Republican candidate and try and appeal to Democrats and do these things, but it's basically impossible. I mean, I'd say there's many other changes, but that's kind of the easiest one.
What about your contact with public officials? A lot of people think, oh, the mayor runs the city and the city council runs the city. And what they don't realize is that the day-to-day operations of the city are run by the city manager, who a lot of people haven't heard of. They don't know who he is. They look to the elected officials as being the ones who are in charge. How much power do our elected officials have versus the city staff?
So Charlotte has what's called a weak mayor form of government. And as Tony said, a city manager runs the city. And that's different from New York City. When we see stuff out of New York or Chicago, other big cities, a new mayor comes in, they start firing people. bringing in their own people. They're in charge. The buck stops with them. Charlotte is different. The mayor and the council collectively hire a manager. The manager and the city staff put forth their vision, and then it's up to the city council to ratify that, yes or no. The way it works is that city staff and the manager, they are hardworking public servants. They have the city's best interest at heart. They want to do the right thing. And they have kind of an idea that they want to push forward and to help Charlotte grow. And for them, the city council is often just an impediment. Like, you're just trying to get them on board with your plan. And so you periodically have city council say, like, wait a minute, I want to know more about this. I don't feel right about this. This doesn't seem like the right thing. And then very often the answer is always like, wow, it's really too late. We've gone too far. We can't say no because we've done all this work. And that's just a debate that happens over and over again. And we're seeing it, bringing the conversation back to Interstate 77, these toll lanes. That is the debate. There are council members who are saying, like, I don't really feel good about this. This doesn't sit well with me. I don't think it's right for the people. And then the other side saying, like, we can't turn back. We've been working too hard, too long. You missed your chance.
That's it for today. To our listeners, thank you for listening. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger at thecharlotteledger.com. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast was produced by Lindsay Banks. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast was presented by Child Care Search, providing families with personalized guidance and free referrals for quality child care programs.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.